Lieutenant Salas was stationed in his underground launch control capsule when he received a frantic call from one of his topside guards.
Screaming into the phone saying they're looking a red glowing object hovering just above our front gate. Our missiles began going into what's called a no-go condition or unlaunchable. Essentially, they were disabled.
Channel 11.
In fact, 10 missiles began going offline in a matter of seconds, one after the other.
Personally, I'm never aware of any 2 missiles going down at the same time, let alone 10.
I was a top secret control officer, and I passed out nuclear launch authenticators. I can clearly recall a message coming through my communications center, which basically said that a UFO did in fact shut down several missile silos in Montana.
I was on duty at Echo, which is our squadron command post. We had strike teams respond to alarms from the missiles. They were 3 to 5 miles away. And they said, sir, lack of a better description, there's a flying saucer hovering over that missile, and there's a beam of reddish light going down to it. It had to be a data collection thing. I'm sure they scanned the warhead or something.
In 1980, I was reassigned from the Pentagon to RAF Bentwaters as a deputy base commander. At that time, Bentwaters was one of the largest tactical fighter ranges in the world.
It was also the largest American nuclear bomb storage depot in Europe.
In December 1980, early in the morning, several of our security policemen discovered strange lights in the forest.
Expecting to find a crashed aircraft, they came upon an unrecognizable object resting on the forest floor.
They observed it for a period of time, and it very quickly and silently vanished.
2 nights later, Colonel Halt received an urgent visit from the base security commander.
He was white as a sheet. He said, "It's back." He said, "What's back?" He said, "The UFO." I took several security policemen with me. I also had my small cassette recorder I carried everywhere when I was on duty.
What is it? We don't know, sir. Yeah, it's a strange, small red light. And all the barnyard animals have gotten quiet now. Deathly calm. This is weird.
One object approached us at very high speed.
Here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now. Now we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal.
We stood there in awe. Was this a warning? Was this an attempt to communicate? Was this a weapon or just a probe? Just as suddenly as it appeared, click, disappeared. We stood there, About that time, we noticed the other object to the south was sending down beams, about a mile and a half away over Woodbridge Base, when we had great difficulties communicating, but we were able to discern that some of those beams were either falling into or near the weapons storage area, and there's a great deal of concern. I also found out later that both the tower operators at Bentwaters saw an object and picked it up on their Bright 2 radar and watched it.
I was just sitting there and I happened to see a dot come on the scope, and it just went like one dot at the beginning, then another dot, and it was gone. And then it made an immediate right-hand turn and came right towards the base. Just absolutely phenomenal.
It's not like any radar target I've ever seen traveling at an extremely high rate of speed. It passed over the control tower, and then it stopped. It was an orangish color. Sort of popped into my mind at the time that somebody's flying a basketball out here. There were like lights around the center of it. It was more like portholes, and then you were seeing the light from the inside, but it hovered momentarily, reversed its course, and went back out at a high rate of speed.
Even more alarming incidents took place on both sides of the Cold War. According to once secret Soviet documents, a UFO hovered over a Ukrainian nuclear base for nearly an hour. Inexplicably, several missiles suddenly switched to full combat readiness and began a launch sequence without any authentication codes. After 15 heart-stopping seconds, the countdown to a potential Armageddon ceased as abruptly as it had started.
As this object passed over the missile site, we would start getting erratic indications on that missile. The bad thing was we also got a launch indicator.
Does that mean that the launch sequence has been triggered?
That means that the missile has received a launch signal.
The countdown had to be manually aborted.
We have UFOs in the air.
These witnesses are some of the most highly vetted military officers in charge of the world's most devastating armaments. If what they're reporting is accurate, then the pattern is hard to avoid. UFOs have been making incursions into top security nuclear facilities decade after decade.
To me, it's pretty clear. This is just, we're shining a light on this, we're pointing it out. What are you people doing with nuclear weapons?
As the 90s dawned and the walls fell down, it was as if humanity itself was demanding to be seen as one people and one world. The Soviet Union had dissolved, and history's spotlight began to shine on long darkened corners.
Different officials were looking for ways to open dialogue with the West and embrace all the changes that were underway in their country at the time.
This is George Knapp in Moscow, the city many are...
Knapp's team was invited to Moscow by government and military officials who were willing to share decades worth of UFO files.
General Igor Maltsev, for 7 years commander of the entire Soviet air defense system, recalls a UFO flap over Moscow in 1990. Hundreds of visual and radar observations by military personnel. Maltsev confirms his standing order was, don't fire on the UFOs. March 1991, radar at the Leningrad airport detects first 1, then 2, then 3 unidentified objects hovering over a nuclear plant. From a dead stop, the UFO zipped away at 2,000 miles per hour.
Jacques Vallée was one of few Westerners to personally investigate the case by meeting with Russian sources firsthand.
An object hovered near a nuclear power plant in Voronezh, and a beam from that object melted the asphalt there.
The intention was maybe we would be able to find out from the Russians more about what the American government knows about UFOs than we will ever learn from the American government itself.
Governor, are you ready to take the oath?
I am.
When a young, open-minded president was sworn in, one of America's most highly placed civilians saw a chance for a new government transparency on the phenomenon.
As a means of access to people, to the wonders of nature.
Heir to the power and influence of one of the world's wealthiest families, Lawrence Rockefeller, philanthropist and conservationist, also had a passionate interest in UFOs.
His idea was to approach the president with a plea for making available the data that the government had on the subject.
The first inclination by particularly people in government is, you gotta be kidding me. You don't want me to risk my career by getting deeply into the rabbit hole of talking about UFOs? And so there's a tremendous resistance.
Rockefeller met with President Clinton's science advisor, Jack Gibbons, at the White House and persuaded him to take action. Rockefeller was then asked to pick a case that the White House should attempt to declassify. He chose the 1947 Roswell incident, noting, quote, Many are convinced that Roswell marks the beginning of government secrecy about UFOs.
Jack had actually gone to the Air Force, asked then Secretary Widnall, who was the Secretary of the Air Force, to take a look particularly at the records around Roswell, New Mexico.
Dear Colonel Cavett, the General Accounting Office seeks to fully explain the claim that the U.S. government recovered an alien spacecraft near Roswell, New Mexico in July 1947, and since that time has covered up that fact.
The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
According to my dad, there was a bad thunderstorm the night before, and the next day he was out on the ranch and he found this debris.
The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico, and the rancher turned it over to the Air Force.
Roswell was then home to the world's only nuclear air wing, including the B-29 that had dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The base's chief intelligence officer, Major Jesse Marcel, was dispatched to the ranch to investigate.
We had to follow the rancher out there. With just verbal directions, we never would have found it.
Marcel and another officer were the first military to arrive at the crash site. They came upon an expanse of unrecognizable debris strewn across an area the size of a dozen football fields.
There was so much of it. It was scattered over such a vast area. We found a piece of metal about a foot and a half to 2 feet wide and about 2 or 3 feet long. Felt like you had nothing in your hands. It wasn't any thicker than the foil out of a pack of cigarettes. The thing about that got me is that you couldn't even bend it, you couldn't dead it. Even with a sledgehammer would bounce off it.
Marcel was ordered to immediately transport the strange wreckage to Fort Worth Army Airfield. There, Marcel was met by the commanding general, who told him to keep silent in the face of what was becoming a media frenzy.
They had a whole flock of microphones there. They wanted me they wanted some comments from me, but I wasn't at liberty to do that.
Marcel was instead ordered to pose with wood, foil, and rubber debris from a conventional weather balloon.
All I could do is keep my mouth shut. And General Ramey is the one who told the newspapers what it was and to forget about it. It was nothing more than a weather observation balloon. Of course, which we both knew differently.
Colonel Thomas DuBose, who was also ordered to pose with the fake debris, describes how an iron curtain of secrecy slammed down.
This is the highest priority you could exhibit, and you will say nothing. More than top secret, as he said it. Beyond that, this is the story we're going to tell the public. It was a cover story, the balloon part of it. In order, we don't have any more inquiries about what we picked up on the desert.
Congressman Schiff, what got you interested in this subject per se?
I started receiving letters a little over 2 years ago from constituents stating that they believed the government was covering up what happened at Roswell. Many of them clearly believed that it was, in fact, an extraterrestrial crash. The weather balloon story never made sense because there was clearly and undisputed, in my mind, extra military attention to this matter, from extra security around the crash scene to special handling of whatever the debris was. That could fit a classified project. It doesn't fit a weather balloon.
In September 1994, the Air Force issued its response, the Roswell Report, case closed. The Air Force claimed it was a secret project of weather balloons hung with box kites and microphones to spy on Soviet nuclear tests.
Please roll the video.
There's the famous box kite that became the famous flying disc. The weather balloons that were on the balloon train.
Same rubber balloon, same foil box kite as the original cover story, only many of them strung together with microphones dangling beneath.
That's the tinfoil paper, rubber, and sticks that they recovered in the desert near New Mexico in 1947.
The Air Force, nearly 50 years later, was basically telling the same tale. That the top security personnel of the world's only atomic bombing wing really had mistaken this rubber, wood, and tinfoil for a crashed flying saucer.
Being an intelligence officer, I was familiar with just about all materials used in aircraft and in our air travel. This is nothing like that. It was not anything from this earth that I'm quite sure of.
My suspicion is that the Roswell incident did happen, and something maybe not from our universe went down there. And we should allow the American people to make a judgment on what that might have been by disclosing. I mean, this is probably the most blatant case of overreaction to what is national security. The public has a right to know.
Rockefeller put together a briefing document intended for world leaders with a sobering observation. It is conceivable that even the president himself is not fully briefed on matters classified as above top secret.
I did attempt to find out if there were any secret government documents that reveal things, and if there were, they were concealed from me too. I wouldn't be the first president that underlings have lied to or that career bureaucrats have waited out. But there may be some career person sitting around somewhere hiding these dark secrets, even from elected presidents. But if so, they successfully eluded me, and I'm almost embarrassed to tell you I did try to find out.
3 feet per second contact now. That was a beautiful one.
Apollo astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who had grown up around Roswell, was an aerospace insider with deep Pentagon connections. He became convinced there were UFO secrets concealed from normal government channels.
Well, if the accounts are to be believed, yes, there have been ET visitation, there have been crashed craft, there have been material and bodies recovered, and there is some group of people somewhere that may or may not be associated with government at this point, but certainly were at one time, that have this knowledge.
No one has proven there's nothing to it. No one's had the opportunity to prove there's something to it. And that's what I did.
And every passing day
In 2007, the most powerful man in the Senate, Majority Leader Harry Reid, persuaded two colleagues, Senators Ted Stevens and Daniel Inouye, to secretly allocate millions in Defense Department funds to investigate UFOs. The covert program operated from the tail end of the Bush presidency through the Obama administration and into Donald Trump's first year in office. In December of 2017, the lid blew off. At long last, the government was admitting a modern-day program to investigate UFOs and released startling official evidence, including videotapes from the cockpits of military aircraft. One of the key authors of the Times story was investigative journalist and best-selling author Leslie Kean. She went to Washington to meet with Luis Elizondo, who had just resigned from his position as head of the secret Pentagon UFO program.
I was invited to this meeting. They wanted me to meet Mr. Elizondo to see what could happen.
Objects that are moving so fast, and yet we don't see an ionization trail in the air, and you don't hear a sonic boom. How is that possible? Another one is...
Elizondo's colleagues took her aside to reveal some extraordinary documentation related to the program.
I wasn't allowed to take anything with me. I mean, the most important evidence that was shared with me at the meeting regarding the phenomenon itself were the videos.
Nickel 6-1 Tango, Monterey, Bravo.
I knew this was breaking news for the front page of the New York Times.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the SA. My gosh. See that thing? It's rotating.
My co-author, Ralph Blumenthal, and I set up a meeting with Mark Mazzetti and said we had this explosive story. Sat down with him in the New York office of the New York Times, and we brought in all the documents. These are the videos. Here's other documents that show the existence of the program. And here's what they've studied, and here's what they've learned. And here's a letter from Harry Reid about the program.
Elizondo's colleague, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Christopher Mellon, managed to obtain the tapes from the Pentagon and chose the New York Times to break the story.
I received the videos, the now famous videos, in the Pentagon parking lot from a Defense Department official. I still have the originals in the packaging. This is a case where somebody bent the rules a little bit, and they did so for the larger good, and we're absolutely all better off because of it. In the end, I have to say I was still extraordinarily disappointed with the New York Times because they focused on this small ATIP program, and the real story, in my mind at least, should have been, these things are real, they're here, this is happening now.
One of the Pentagon cases reported by the New York Times was an encounter by naval aircraft about 200 miles off the coast of San Diego, California.
5,500 people that were on the Nimitz in 2004 when this happened, and I guarantee every single one of them knows that this event happened. That's a whole air wing, that's Mount Fuji, that's Japan.
Commander David Fravor was leading a training exercise from the USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group when he was abruptly ordered to investigate an unknown target that had appeared on one of the ship's radar scopes.
We're going to suspend the training. We have real-world tasking, so we're like, okay, cool.
He and another F-18 Super Hornet, each carrying 2 airmen, zoomed toward the coordinates.
So it's myself and my Wizzo, and the other pilot and the Wizzo in the back seat of that airplane, so there's 4 of us.
When they arrived, they first saw what appeared to be a large object slightly below the surface of the ocean, with a strange oval-shaped craft darting around in the air just above it.
If you picture a Tic Tac that's about 40 feet long, round on both ends, no rivets, no metal, smooth white. It was white. It was just smooth, no wings, no propulsion, no windows. It didn't matter which way it was pointing, because as it was moving over the water, it would go, it never turned, it never changed its longitudinal axis. It went fore, aft, left, right. It was just doing this. And I said, hey, I'm gonna go check that out. All of a sudden, you just see it turn its body and go, whoop, and start coming up at you. You go, that was rather interesting. We're just looking at it, we're doing this, we're looking at it, we're looking at it, we're looking at it. We go around all the way around the outside of the circle 180 degrees. Well, I know where he's going, so I'll just go over there. So this thing goes poof, and it's gone. I mean, literally that fast. Gone. You can think about what we're saying, like, holy shit, what the is that? And then there's a lot of, dude, what the? Did you guys see that? Do you guys see it? And they're like, it's gone, we don't see shit. Nothing accelerates that fast. You're talking, something that not only accelerated beyond anything that we had seen, but it just was. The controller comes up and says, hey, you're not gonna believe this, but that thing is back at your cap point.
Meaning the object had instantly reappeared at the precise secret coordinates of the fleet's critical aerial defense zone.
It obviously had some awareness. It knew where we were going. That'll make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. And I actually told my backs here, I said, I don't know about you, I'm pretty weirded out.
More jets equipped with the Navy's most advanced radar visual tracking systems were scrambled, this time capturing the object on video.
First thing he gets is a little blip on the radar. He puts his cursors over it, and he tries to grab a lock on it. Basically, when you take a lock, you tell the radar, look at that location and stare at it and put all your energy on that point. Well, as soon as it does it, the radar gets indications that it's being jammed by the object it's trying to lock. The infrared sees differing temperatures, so the Tic Tac is actually hotter than the air around it. It doesn't have to be by much, but it's going to appear white. They're driving straight at it. It's just kind of hovering there. And then it goes poof, and it takes off the side. I just don't know. I doubt that we have developed that technology.
I interviewed 3 of the 4 aviators who were with Dave during that encounter. And it was readily apparent to everyone involved that that vehicle had what they call dominant battle space awareness. It was in control of that engagement from the outset. There was no question that it completely outmatched our frontline fighters. I served on the Special Access Program Oversight Committee, so I had access to all of the black programs in those days. We know perfectly well there's nothing like that behind the scenes or even on the drawing boards.
Senator Harry Reid, who instigated the secret Pentagon UFO program, confirmed what nuclear launch officers have been reporting for decades.
There's more than one up there.
UFOs have interfered with our country's most powerful weapons.
If they had been called upon by the president to launch, couldn't have done it.
Did you have anybody in the Defense Department, the Pentagon, pull you aside, bend your ear, and say, why are you doing this?
They did everything they could to stop the program from going forward. They gave the person that came to me initially such a bad time. He's fortunate to have hung on to his job because people tried to get rid of him because they wanted nothing to do with this. The Defense Intelligence Agency was one of the worst. They drugged their feet, even though there was one of their senior scientists thought they should look at this. And remember, all we're saying, nobody has to agree that why it's there, but shouldn't we at least be spending some money to study all these phenomenon? Shouldn't we study this stuff? The answer is yes, and that's all this was about, and why the federal government all these years has covered up, put brake pads on everything, stopped it. I think it's very, very bad for our country.
I interviewed Gordon Cooper, Mercury astronaut Gordon Cooper, back in the 90s. Cooper said on camera that there was a landed UFO at circa 1957 at Edwards Air Force Base. His camera crew captured the filming of this object, and he presented this to the higher-ups, and eventually a courier jet came in from Washington. He handed the footage over, which was good. He viewed it.
That's the last he saw of it.
Exactly. Did you know where that footage went of the flying saucer that landed on the tarmac?
Went to Washington, that's all that I know.
Did you ever keep in touch with anybody about it or discuss it?
How would I keep in touch with anybody about it? There's no way within the military or within the government of keeping track of something that is classified.
Did you try to go after stuff like this?
We did. We have. It's there.
Are you saying that there's some evidence that's still hasn't seen the light of day?
I'm saying most of it hasn't seen the light of day.
Astronaut Cooper had spoken with the president at a cabinet meeting. He raised this with Secretary Cohen, and then Cohen's office called me and asked me to pursue this and chase it down. The Air Force colonel that I spoke with got very frustrated, and when I asked him what happened to all of these records, he said, well, that was all cleaned up or thrown out to save space, something like that. That sounded ludicrous, but that's what he told me. If there is some recovered debris, say, it is so deeply buried and squirreled away that it's outside of those normal oversight processes, and that's where there's a problem in this area.
Dr. Jacques Vallée has collected purported metal debris from UFO cases dating as far back as 1947 that experts are analyzing in a state-of-the-art laboratory.
The breakthrough has come with the invention of a machine that enables us to look at the atomic structure. And at that point, the atomic structure is impossible to fake.
This device is a multi-parameter ion beam imager.
Dr. Gary Nolan, a Stanford microbiologist, is using a revolutionary three-dimensional imaging device to analyze the samples right down to their individual atoms. When Dr. Nolan placed some of the fragments in the vacuum chamber of his instrument, he was astonished to find their composition was unlike any known metal.
Just one spot, and the isotopic composition all the way across.
No matter where he looked in the sample's jumble of elements, whether magnesium, iron, nickel, or titanium, the ratio of isotopes didn't make any sense.
If you're talking about an advanced material from an advanced civilization, you're talking about something that I'll just call it an ultra material, right? It's something which has properties where somebody is putting it together, again, at the atomic scale. So we're building our world with 80 elements. Somebody else is building the world with 253 different isotopes. I intend to use the information to try to build something, to try to understand a physical principle that we don't know today.
This material was manufactured. It's not natural. It's not natural to the materials that we have around us in the lab or on the Earth. It does not mean that it was necessarily made someplace in outer space. It just means that it was manufactured specially for a particular purpose that we don't understand, and we want to understand it.
There is an immense array of unanswered questions. What we observe some of these craft doing, think about the possibilities, what we may discover technologically, how we might solve the energy crisis, how we might raise our standards of living. There is an urgent need, in my view, to get to the bottom of it. We don't know the origin of these vehicles, nor do we understand the intent of whoever is controlling them.
There are cases that seem to go beyond encounters with an advanced technology to contact with an engaged intelligence. Papua New Guinea, June 1959. An Australian missionary spots a large disc hovering just 200 feet off the ground while standing with 38 other people.
This solid-looking object, and can you imagine what it's like to look up in the sky and see some figures up there?
All were amazed to see 4 small occupants dressed in what looked like black diving suits.
Figures walking about on top and not the slightest noise whatsoever. And so we waved. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could get this object down onto the playing field? And as we waved, wondering whether we'd get some recognition and whether perhaps they would understand what we wanted, they waved back.
The encounter lasted several hours before the object abruptly departed.
There was this amazingly incredible speed that the whole craft disappeared to nothing across the bay in a matter of a second or so. In
1994, 3 days of sightings across Zimbabwe culminated in what some believe is the most significant close encounter in modern history.
Hundreds of people today phoned the ZBC and the BBC correspondent in Harare saying they sighted an unidentified flying object last night. We have some eyewitness reports.
It almost seemed to be under the clouds. As it came past, I noticed there's no noise, and that's when I thought, well, there's something very odd here.
It was quite amazing. It was beautiful.
They are saying that Jesus is passing through Africa. That's what they are saying.
We interviewed about 64 children in front of the camera.
The UFO story that happened.
Just say exactly what you want to say, okay?
Well, I was running and playing, and then I saw this maroon color in the sky. Why don't we follow it? We saw this, like, a silver thing down there. It was a silver oval thing that flew past really slowly.
I saw the bigger one, and the spaceship, like 4 or 5 of them. It was red, green, and yellow.
There was this big ship. It had these lights, these patterns, and it flew. I thought, no, it's not a UFO. And then I looked carefully at it, and I thought, maybe.
Dozens of children said that one or more of the disc-shaped objects landed just beyond the far edge of their playground. The next thing they knew, something was standing next to it.
We saw him standing by the silver thing, and he had big eyes.
He had a big head and big black eyes and was dressed in a black bodysuit.
They were wearing pure black.
And I came down and I saw the funny man with his eyes here, and I saw a spaceship, and there were a few little ones around it.
How far away were you when you saw him?
Not very far, about a meter away.
A meter away, that close?
Yes.
And how big was the figure?
It was about as big as a grade 6.
I believe that the children did see something.
I believe them because normally children don't lie.
I've always taught my children seeing is believing. Unfortunately, I didn't see, so...
This alleged encounter caught the attention of Pulitzer Prize-winning Harvard psychiatrist Dr. John Mack.
Seemed that he was looking at all of us.
What did it feel like when he was looking at you?
Felt scared.
It felt scary? What was scary about it?
Well, felt scared because I've never seen such a person like that before. And I saw this person, and it had big eyes. That's all I saw about it, big eyes.
They had short legs and quite a long top.
Mm-hmm.
With a big head and eyes that are bigger than ours.
How much bigger than ours?
4 or 5 times the size.
4 or 5 times the size of ours.
So then I was looking at him, right? Yeah. Then he was looking at me back. I couldn't just keep on looking at him, so I had to stop and I looked sideways. But I was looking straight into his eyes. Well, he never said anything. It's just that the face is the eyes. Maybe they're trying to communicate with us, show us something which we don't know about. I think they want people to know that we're actually making harm on this world and we mustn't get too technologized. We don't look after the planet. All the trees will just go down and there will be no air and people will be dying.
Is this an idea you have had before, or did this idea come to you when you had this experience?
When I had this experience.
Mm-hmm.
For the first time in nearly 20 years, the Ariel school children gathered from the 4 corners of the world to talk to each other about the experience they shared that September morning.
I remember something there.
One they all still struggle to understand.
You know that it's moving, but
I stand by what I saw. There was no reason for any of us to make that up.
I've not spoken to anybody about it. Not because I'm not proud of it, but because I don't want the stigma.
So it's something that I've had to deal with for 19 and a half years.
I don't want to say I felt like I knew it, but I knew that I didn't have to be afraid of it.
They took us back to the moment of contact.
Exactly how I felt, exactly.
The details still seared into memory.
I was with one of the other girls and saying to her, this is amazing.
We all were just stopped in our tracks.
A little man appear on top of the actual craft. And that moment for me was very distinct because I was like, that's not human.
I was just completely engulfed in these eyes.
The eyes, and in that moment, however long it was, because I have no idea of the time frame, it was mesmerizing.
There was no talking. It's all just images in the head. Telepathic communication.
They were trying to communicate, trying to tell us something. It was something to do with the environment.
I kept getting these thoughts and ideas in my mind of technology. Technology is not helping, technology is bad.
And we're going down a wrong path, and we have to start recognizing that what we're doing is detrimental, and we need to make changes. And I don't know what to do with that, or they were reaching out to us. It was as if they wanted us to go with them. At that moment, that was kind of when I snapped right out of the trance.
As soon as I broke contact, all of those feelings, technology, the bad, the horribleness that was happening and going around my body at the time went.
It's making me a bit anxious being back here.
I can feel it right now. I was scared.
They came running up here in such a panic, screaming, ah, and they were here, you know, and a child can't make that up.
So I was there when they were interviewing them and saw the way they were. It was just a huge big mess and muddle up and just people everywhere. Just asked them questions straight off without explaining to the children what they were doing and why they were doing it.
It was chaos in terms of the media frenzy that was going on and us being so young and not even being allowed time to comprehend what we had seen. Our teachers certainly didn't believe us, so that was a big deal because we had to continue going to school there.
We went back one last time to the Ariel School to meet with Judy Bates, a teacher at the time of the incident and now the headmistress. Something was weighing on her that she wanted to tell the children.
Yeah, I said I wanted to apologize. I should have taken more notice. But I didn't. I was more concerned about me and not them, and what was going on in my own sort of experience. And that's what, yeah.
And if you could summarize in just one sentence what took place September 1994 here at Ariel School, Ruwa, Zimbabwe, what would you say?
Aliens visited us. And that's about it, yeah. And that's where if you believe it, you believe it. If you don't, well.
We find ourselves confronted with something that challenges our very understanding of reality. We may be sharing this fragile blue-green oasis with an unknown other. One with a mysterious relationship to humanity and its own interest in our world.
And if you saw him again, what would you do?
I'll ask him what is he doing on Earth and what does he want with us.
There were well-observed UFO cases, just like modern cases in the 18th century, in the 17th century. There was science. There were astronomers. They had telescopes. And they were very good observers because their life depended on being good observers. And these observations come from all over the world. They just have been forgotten.
I like to think of anomalies, mysteries as opportunities. And we'll go after those mysteries, take the torch away from the campfire and out of the cave into the darkness and make some amazing discoveries.
The UFO phenomenon, as studied by my colleagues and myself, bespeaks the action of some form of intelligence.
A tendência dos governos é acobertar tudo aquilo que ele não consegue explicar à sua população.
These objects gave the impression that they wanted to be seen. With these enormous spotlights, there was no way that they were trying to hide. So why? That is the main question. Why do these objects want to be seen?
Later on, I was so sorry that why I did not call on the radio, ask them, who are you? Please, make communication with us.
I figure if they're smart enough and capable enough to to come into our airspace with the technology that they have, if they wanted to do us in, they could have done us in a long time ago. So I'm not fearful of this at all.
咱也确定不了当时是什么东西，但是肯定不是飞机，
并且可以瞬间的这个出现或者消失，甚至可以悬停在空中。
我觉得如果这样公开于世界的话，会极大的促进世界人类的科学技术水平的发展，有利于人类的进步，这是一件大好事。
There was one of them goes, zip,
It went like a bat out of hell.
Jumped about 10 degrees to the right, just like this.
I've never seen anything go so fast in my life as that thing went.
Incredible speed, disappeared to nothing.
And just went zoom straight up so fast.
It's like it had been shot out of a gun. Wham!
Now you see it, now you don't. It just, phew.
But it just was